Hey everybody, it's Joel from Enlightened Gamer and Dad, Son, and Game. Thanks for checking this out. I'm going to talk to you guys today about they call it about a dozen different things. A trading card game, a collector's card game, a customizable card game. It's a game that's called Force of Will. And what all those little monikers mean that they've given these games, they basically mean that you're going to buy packs of these cards blindly. You're just going to buy a random pack and hope that there's some cool stuff in there. And then you're going to buy enough cool stuff, hopefully over time, that you can put together a nice deck, use that deck to play this game. So this game, the model is very similar to what they do with a lot of other collectible card games, trading card games, whatever you want to call it, such as Magic the Gathering. So from now on, I'm going to work with the assumption that you have some idea of how Magic the Gathering works, or some other collectible card game works. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this game. The game is basically, I don't know what the lore is. You can read the stories on their website. It's basically the idea that good's fighting evil for the fate of the earth. The same kind of idea that happens in a lot of these games. Which good versus evil? Kind of a cool thing to use. But it's done a little bit differently in this than it is in some other games. So you have some really lighthearted and fun characters in this game. You have some stuff like fairy tale characters. Tinkerbell's in this game. Snow White. I think Cinderella has a card. The Wizard of Oz has cards in this game. So that's fun. In itself, I think that's fun. But, you could play potentially as the Wizard of Oz, the Cowardly Lion, Dorothy, Tin Man, and whatever I missed, the Straw Man, the Scarecrow. You could play as them fighting demons. I mean, like, depending on what your opponent's deck is. So that's an interesting thing in its own. So that's enough to get you interested, I think, probably. But now let's talk about the actual game. The actual game is done with a deck. Now, I'm going to talk about the deck for a moment here because it's a little different than the deck that you would use when you play Magic the Gathering. And then there's 3 parts to it. So Magic the Gathering, you take 60 cards, you put them together. Good rule of thumb is to put about 20 mana cards in there and about 40 cards of land. Or not, land is mana. Put 40 cards that are creatures, spells, whatever you want to do. And then support that with the 20 mana cards, which are land usually. This game is a little different. There's basically 3 different components to the deck. The first component you have, and the one that is the main difference between this and Magic the Gathering, is you start off with what they call a J ruler, or just a ruler sometimes. It's basically a planeswalker if you're familiar with Magic the Gathering. So you have a card that is really, it's kind of a neat concept. It makes the game have almost like player powers, or a little bit of asymmetrical play a little bit, in that usually when the themes of decks are played out, it's through their type of mana or the color they are. So if you have a red deck, you're going to do a lot of direct damage. If you have a green deck, you're going to slowly build up and get these big monsters out and eat faces with these big monsters. Well, you still do that with this. And it still is true that you have the 5 kinds, I'm getting ahead of myself, but you have the 5 kinds of mana that you do see in Magic the Gathering, but the J ruler makes it even a little more so. So the J ruler gives you a special ability. So there's 2 sides to the J ruler card. The first side is just, hey, you're kind of overseeing things and you have this extra power. And that's something like you can tap this card and you are able to do this little buff. Or if you pay 1 of the certain mana kind, you can search your deck for something. Those are kinds of ideas of the little powers that you get with what they call a J ruler. The J ruler, though, then flips over once a certain condition is met, called Judgment. And when it flips over, it basically, it's gotten mad. It's ready to fight. And so that's when the really big power comes out. Usually there's a once a game type power where you can do something called like God's Art, where it buffs all the characters on the field. Or there's some that are really nasty and they kill everything on the field when they have this happen. Basically, if you want to equate it to Magic the Gathering, it would be very similar to a Planeswalker, how you keep building those points up, and then all of a sudden that big thing happens at the bottom for, once you get 7 or 8 points built up on your Planeswalker. That's what basically happens with these judgments. But every deck has a J ruler in it. And you don't have to find it in your deck. It's always there. It's always ready to go. It's a part of the game. It just sits on your mat. The second part is your 40 card deck. This is the deck of cards that are, of creatures that are they're called resonators, that are gonna help you fight your opponent. It's where they have chants or spells in there. They have a lot of different things, equipment that you can equip onto your resonators. That's all gonna happen in your 40 card deck. And then the final one is your mana. You have a mana pool of 10 to 20 cards. This mana pool basically is just mana cards. So if you're familiar with Magic, this would be like land cards. It would be like doing a 40 card base deck and then a 10 card mana or land deck on the side. So what that does for you, what it helps with, is you can't be mana screwed, they call it. You can't be where you don't have the right mana laid down on the table in order for you to play the cards in your hand. So let's back up a second here. If you aren't familiar with that, basically there's a cost associated with playing every card in your main deck. And that cost is paid for with what they call mana, or like basically magic points, these resources. And so the symbol that you pay with looks like this. Looks like this right here. And basically, or right here, I don't know, depending on what fake blue screen I put in here. It looks like that. And basically what that does is it says you need to pay this cost. You need to pay 1 blue plus 2 of any color. And this is something that should be familiar to Magic players. This is how you do it. Now, there are different kinds of mana that you're going to put in your mana deck. There's the 5 basic mana types, and this is going to sound so familiar to players of Magic again. There's blue, red, green, white, black. Blue is water, white is wind, what they call it. Blue water, green is the wind, red is fire, white or yellow, on the cards that are really yellow, is lightness, and then there's darkness, which is like a purple or black. And they do really kind of closely resemble what you do in Magic the Gathering with those colors. So the green deck is all about ramping up and trying to hit somebody hard with a big creature you put out later in the game. And the white deck is about, healing and purity and things like that. Blue is about drawing tons of cards. And black is a control type thing. I'm going to try and manipulate the graveyard, and I'm going to try and put characters into the graveyard. Red is like the punk rock of all this. It's just like, yeah, red, we're just going to be like in your face, these 3 chords over and over again. But it works a lot. So the different colors play differently. So as you build decks, you're going to have, every time you play with a different deck, you're going to feel like you're almost playing a different game. And that's especially amplified with the use of J rulers. So what does the gameplay look like? Well, basically in your turn, you're going to draw a card, flip over one of your mana stones, and then those are cumulative. So you flip over the first one the first round, second one the second round, third one third. And if you know what this sounds like to me is Hearthstone, where you keep getting more and more mana pool to draw from, it is very similar to that. The only difference is in Hearthstone, they've really simplified mana. So there's only one type. In this, there are several types. So you can have pretty complex mana stones in there. So it's a step up from the mana system in Hearthstone in complexity, but it's also a step up, and you potentially could have problems there. So let's say I have a blue and red combination deck, which you can totally do. I flip over 3 red cards. I have all blue cards in my hand. I'm in trouble. So the game, going back to that, I'm flipping over my mana cards. I keep getting more and more, and as I get more and more out, I can do more and more things. So later in the game, I'm going to be able to do more actions in one round, or I'm going to be able to put out bigger creatures in one round. So the first few rounds, it's a little bit slow, a little simple. You're using your cheap spells that cost, 1 or 2 mana, and putting them into your battlefield. Or you're putting them into your graveyard if they're like a spell. So there's different kinds of cards here. You can do spells that do direct damage to the other player. You start off with 4,000 health, which this is a little different too than Magic. Magic's all done, and this is one area where Magic is definitely a superior game to Force of Will, in that I don't like the goofy hundreds system they use. You start off with 4,000 points. Why can't they just make that 40? But you do start off with 4,000 health points, and then you're done damage in hundreds. So it makes it feel a little more fun, like you're doing this big ramped up thing. But really all it is you start off with 40 hit points, and you're going to get your hit points taken down. And that can either be by direct damage with spells done to you, or by creatures attacking you. And it's the same way that you do battle in Magic the Gathering. You tap your creatures when they attack, and then they need to rest your next round. So if a creature attacks, unless you do something to help it, or has a special ability, it's not going to be able to attack the next time that your opponent attacks you. The other option you have is you don't attack. You're going to keep that guy there to defend. Or maybe do nothing, because you don't want to lose him. One difference on this over Magic the Gathering is in Magic the Gathering, you attack the other Planeswalker. In this one, you can do what they call a target attack, which is you can attack any creature on the battlefield, which is kind of neat. Or if you don't have the target attack ability, this is something else that makes it interesting for if you want to use a guy and attack with him or not, is you can attack rested or tapped creatures. So if a creature is tapped, you can attack it. If he has some big beast that's nasty there, and I want to attack it and get it off the battlefield, I can do that. And that's because he's tapped and rested. So that's another difference a little bit over Magic the Gathering. But you get your opponent down to 0 points and you win the game. So that's a real brief, in a nutshell, kind of what happens in this game. if it sounds pretty familiar and sounds a lot like Magic the Gathering, it's because it's very similar in a lot of ways. But I will tell you that the difference between this and Magic the Gathering is the card pool in this game is, at this point, I would guess under 2,000 cards, maybe even under 1,000 cards. Whereas Magic the Gathering has several thousand cards in its card pool. I know there's people watching this video right now that have the exact numbers. The point I'm making is that there are many more Magic cards to pick from than there are Force of Will cards to pick from. Now, they do standard cycles, and if you do play standard Magic, it might be more similar. But if you're playing some legacy stuff, then it's going to be a little different. If you're playing that modern variant where you can play every card back for the last 10 years, you're looking at a lot more cards. So if you're a brand new player and you're looking to jump back into this game or start playing this game, then this game might be for you, because the idea that you can learn a few hundred cards and have a much better basic understanding of the game and be able to build decks is much more appealing than having to learn thousands. Now, the other thing too is I have built decks in Magic the Gathering. I've done it, and I've done some fairly okay ones, but I've never built a great deck. I've never built a deck and I'm like, oh man, I love how this plays, because there's always a different card out there that you can put in. There's always something you can do. With this one, I think the first deck I threw together, I was more pleased with it than I was with any of my Magic decks, and how well things had good synergy or systems energy, and how they, clicked together. The combos just worked really well. And I think that it's maybe because it's a little more of an intermediate level thinking that happens here. On Magic the Gathering, you can really think heavily about, well, this card from 2 years ago and that set would probably work really well with this card here now. I feel like with this set, with this game, only having to worry about the last few sets and a few hundred cards in each set is really kind of cool. And it allows you to be like, oh yeah, that Grim card would work really well with this Alice card, which are names of sets. So I think that's pretty neat. The other thing too that's really neat on this too is if you want to build a really competitive Magic the Gathering deck, you're looking at, there's different rarities of cards in Magic. That's true in this game as well, but it's a little different. You have what they call common, uncommon, rare, and then mythic cards, basically. Mythical rarity cards in Magic. And mythical rarity cards in Magic range from, $1 or so up to, hundreds of dollars for a mythical card. And those mythical cards are just really, really awesome and super powerful. And they come at a rate of maybe, I think I've gotten a booster box of 36 packs of Magic, and I got probably 10 of those cards, maybe. In what I'm doing now in Force of Will, they have common, uncommon, then they have rare and super rare. And then there's also uber rare, but uber rare and super rare, only difference between those are the rarities of them. So sometimes they'll have a card that's like a 1 in 300 packs type rarity. It's the same card as a super rare variant. It's a variant of a super rare card, basically. Which makes it kind of fun to find that golden ticket in your pack, but it's not like you're going to have to chase a card that costs a few $100s to really make a super competitive deck. So I'm not downplaying Magic the Gathering, saying that it's the most expensive game in the world to play, but I am going to say that the cards that you get in Force of Will and as a whole are more useful than what you get in Magic the Gathering, in my experience at least. In Magic the Gathering, I was basically throwing away the commons or throwing them into a box. Some uncommons would make it in decks, and then those rares really and super rares or not ultra rare, those mythicals are where you were looking for your cards that you were going to put in your deck. This game has foil cards in it, much like Magic the Gathering, where you're going to be trying to seek those rare cards. So I want to make clear on this that I am a fan of Magic the Gathering also. I don't think Magic is a bad game at all whatsoever. I think it's a great game, truthfully. This game thinks it's a great game as well, or else it wouldn't borrow 90% of its elements from it. It's such a similar game, just with a couple little twists that I really enjoy. It makes the game more fun for me. I think what it really does is it makes a casual player able to be much more competitive. I feel like I could play in tournaments with Force of Will, where I couldn't play in Magic the Gathering tournaments and be very, very successful without spending a large amount of time studying cards. I can do much less studying and building and just play the game with this one, it feels like. To me, and that, everyone's perception is a little different. Maybe you have a different perception on things than I do, and that's fine. If you do, that's totally fine. I could be totally wrong. So leave a comment. Let me know what you think about this, what you think about Force of Will. don't stop playing Magic. It's a cool game too. This is just a little bit different version of it. And whether it'll be around in 5 years or not, who knows? We've seen a lot of trading card games come and go, but I'm really enjoying it while it's out right now. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.